We all start off with equal chances, and those who are diligent enough will make it to the top, while the lazy ones will fail on their own individual responsibility. This is the ideal of meritocracy, which, very simplified, is a society in which everyone gets what they deserve. The rich ones are where they are because, well, they're freaking super geniuses and therefore deserve their societal position. And the ones who aren't, well, I guess they suck, right? Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu believed that this is a false narrative. He instead claimed that the reason someone ends up where they are within society is determined by the amount of capital they own. But when talking about capital, Bourdieu isn't only referring to it in the way we usually think of it in the form of economic capital. Instead, he claims that apart from economic capital, there are other forms of capital that a person can have that are just more hidden and less easily detectable as economic capital. In this video, I want to talk about Bourdieu's approach to inequality within his theory of forms of capital, to show that the idea of meritocracy is a myth.
Oui, alors là, je pense que le sens de l'entreprise.
According to Bourdieu, economic capital builds the foundation of the different types of capital. It is defined by the property of being instantaneously convertible into money, and among other things includes what Marx defined as the means of production, which refers to technologies, machines, and resources that are used for the production of goods and commodities. Furthermore, economic capital includes any type of exchange value and properties. Accordingly, factories in which goods are being produced are also economic capital. Economic capital can also be institutionalized in the form of property rights. Of course, money itself is also a form of economic capital. It is not evenly distributed. Currently, about 1% of the world population own around 50% of the available capital. Some of the richest people in the world, such as Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, own around $100 billion each. This is an important thing to note because the disparity within the distribution of wealth builds the foundation for the disparity of the other forms of capital. Let me explain this by taking a closer look at the next form of capital that Bourdieu states, cultural capital. He furthermore divides this type into three subcategories: the incorporated or embodied state, the objectified state, and lastly, the institutionalized state. Bourdieu used the conception of cultural capital to explain the inequality in regards to the opportunities children face while growing up. To put it simply, cultural capital for Bourdieu means capital related to having certain information or knowledge. And just like the other forms of capital, some people have more of it and others less. But let's take a look at each category separately. Incorporated cultural capital refers to the knowledge or education that someone has. Somebody, for example, that has knowledge about the bureaucratic relations of a certain application system will have an advantage in regards to getting a certain job or position that a person with a lower level of education won't have. Bourdieu says that the accumulation of incorporated capital as to gaining information and learning requires the investment of time. Someone with a lower economic capital will accordingly be limited in their ability to invest this time if their economic situation requires them to invest their time for sustaining their economic stability. Embodied cultural capital can also not just be exchanged or delegated to someone else. It is part of what Bourdieu calls habitus, which defines the internalized social objective relations in the form of individual dispositions of social agents. Let me just explain this real quick because it's actually much more simple than it sounds like. Bourdieu says that when humans grow up within a certain community or society, they incorporate the meanings that are part of the social structures they find themselves in. But these meanings, or how Bourdieu says dispositions, are not conscious intentions. Instead, we could better describe them as subconscious memories of social experiences. It is these dispositions that determine if I know how to behave within certain social environments or not. They form what we could call the lifestyle of a person, the way they behave, speak, eat, and even their physical appearance. a person growing up within a rich background will have a different habitus as someone growing up on a farm. The confusion to be in an unfamiliar social environment where people behave differently is related to not having the particular dispositions of this habitus. Accordingly, people that own particular embodied cultural capital, or in other words, people with a particular habitus, have a certain symbolic societal prestige that others don't have. Therefore, the symbolic worth of being a pilot differs from being a construction worker. The main institution that is responsible for how much cultural capital someone will have within society is the family. Bourdieu writes, quote, "The initial accumulation of cultural capital, the precondition for the fast, easy accumulation of every kind of useful cultural capital, starts at the outset without delay, without wasted time, only for the offspring of families endowed with strong cultural capital. In this case, the accumulation period covers the whole period of socialization." Consequently, families with more economic capital can provide more time for their children to be educated because they are less exposed to economic constraints. Bourdieu says that it's these factors and not natural capabilities such as the IQ which benefit children of certain families with more cultural capital and give them a head start that they will benefit from for the rest of their lives. The incorporated cultural capital stands in direct relation to the objectified cultural capital, which Bourdieu identifies as the material carriers of knowledge and information. The most simple example for objectified cultural capital would be a book. To make use of the objectified cultural capital, it is required to have embodied cultural capital. Understanding a book, for example, requires someone to speak the language, to be able to read it, but also to be familiar with the particular meanings and symbols related to the book's subject. Other examples of objectified cultural capital are machines, instruments, computers, or even pieces of art. They benefit those that own them, but require the knowledge to be understood or used. The last form of cultural capital is what Bourdieu calls institutionalized cultural capital. As the name suggests, it is the institutionalized legitimation of incorporated cultural capital. This includes things such as academic titles or school certificates. Whereas embodied cultural capital has no legal worth to it, institutionalized capital formally ensures this lag by providing a legal approval for having a certain specialization and amount of knowledge. Bourdieu uses the example of the French concours, which is a competitive recruitment examination that is used in France to choose students to study at the prestigious Grande École universities and includes questions that are mostly related to general knowledge. This examination determines the fates of the young people and institutionalizes their possibilities for future success. Institutionalized cultural capital gives their owners a certain market worth and makes them comparable and exchangeable. The next form of capital Bourdieu identifies is social capital. Social capital includes the advantages and resources that are provided by the social networks that a person is connected to. These connections can rather be private connections, such as being befriended to a lawyer, or institutionalized, such as being part of a certain club or group. Similarly to cultural capital, social capital advantages people that have more of it. Social capital enables things such as nepotism or favoritism, where people get certain job positions or benefits just because they are part of a certain family or group. Knowing someone in the golf club that knows someone else can be a huge advantage. It can bring them into certain job positions or make something accessible that otherwise wouldn't have been accessible. Now, according to Bourdieu, the forms of capital are transferable. That means each type of capital can be transferred into another type. I could, for example, buy myself into a golf club and thereby gain social capital from the invested economic capital. But it works the other way around as well. I could also benefit from the social capital of knowing someone at the golf club and gain more economic capital because of getting a certain better job position. Economic capital can also be transferred into cultural capital. We have already talked about how money can provide the economic security for the accumulation of incorporated cultural capital. Having more money means more time to be able to invest in education. Having less economic capital, on the other hand, means more time needs to be invested in providing financial security. With money, someone can also buy objectified cultural capital in the form of goods such as books, instruments, or computers. Bourdieu's conception shows the hypocrisy behind the idea of an equality of opportunity for everyone. We saw how dissimilar the different forms of capital are distributed between people that own more and less economic capital. Families with more economic wealth can't only provide a head start for their children by allocating cultural capital that they will benefit from for the rest of their lives. Richer families can also utilize more social capital, which comes with its own set of advantages. The thoroughly unjust distribution of capital reinforces its own stagnation.